Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Civic Math. In part one, we explored Massachusetts as a colony. We looked at its population, economy, fishing industry, trade networks, and growing frustrations with British rule. But today, we are going to examine the events that transformed Massachusetts from a colony of protest into the birthplace of revolution. We'll use mathematics to investigate the Boston Tea Party, Paul Revere's famous ride, Lexington and Concord, the spread of revolutionary ideas, and look at into some key political figures as well. By the end of this episode, we'll see how a series of calculations, risks, and decisions helped launch the American Revolution. Let's begin. As we did in part one on Massachusetts, we are going to examine this part two through sections. In section one, we are going to look at one of the most famous events that shaped the American Revolution, the Boston Tea Party, by numbers. Okay? And this event occurred on December 16th, 1773. That night, a group of colonists boarded three ships in Boston Harbor, three British ships in Boston Harbor. Their target was tea. Their goal was protest. By the end of the night, they had dumped. So out of three ships, British ships, the protest or the colonists had dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. Now let's see what that means. Historians estimate that tea weighed approximately 92,000 pounds. Okay, so 92,000 pounds divided by 342, that's roughly 269 pounds per chest. One tea chest weighed around 269 pounds. That's heavy. Now imagine lifting even one chest or moving 342 of these from the ships okay, to the Boston Harbor. Okay. This was not a random act. It required organization, planning, and coordination. Okay. In section 2, how much tea was destroyed? Okay. So we came to 92,000 pounds. Suppose a modern tea bag, okay, a modern tea bag that we all have in our homes, weighed approximately 2 grams, okay, of tea. So 92,000 pounds multiplied by 454 grams, that's roughly 41,768,000 grams. So let's divide 41,768,000. Let's divide that by 2. Okay, that's roughly 20,884,000. That's tea bags. So more than 20 million tea bags were dumped into Boston Harbor. on that famous night. The Boston Tea Party was designed to send a message, okay? And Britain received it. In section 3, Paul Revere's rights. Let's look into that. Less than 2 years later, that was on April 18, 1775, Paul Revere rode through Massachusetts warning local communities that British troops were moving toward Concord. His mission was simple: spread information as quickly as he could. How fast can information travel without telephones, radio, television, or the internet? Paul Revere's route covered approximately 13 miles. So from Boston to Lexington. Okay. If he averaged 10 miles per hour, okay, that's going to be 13 divided by 10. It's about 1.3 hours to cover that distance. So approximately 1 hour and 18 minutes to cover this distance. Today, we can send a text message across the world instantaneously. In 1775, information moved as fast as a horse could travel. In section 4, okay, Lexington, the first shot. Okay. On April 19, 1775, British troops arrived at Lexington. They encountered approximately 77 colonial militia members. They were known as Minutemen. Okay, and the British troops were about 700. So the ratio was 77 or 700. So the math here is kind of even scary. So that's roughly 9. So the ratio was 9 British soldiers for every Minuteman. Okay. The odds looked overwhelming, yet the colonists somehow stood their ground. The first shots of the Revolutionary War were fired. To this day, nobody knows exactly who fired first, but everyone knew what came next. It was the war. Okay. In section 5, the road to Concord. The British objective was to seize colonial military supplies stored in Concord. Lexington was only the beginning. After passing through Lexington, British forces continued toward Concord, distance approximately 18 miles from Boston. For modern American, that may be a short drive. For soldiers marching on foot, carrying equipment, it was a major operation. The farther the British marched, the farther they moved from support, and the more time local militia had to respond. Section 6, The return to Boston. Now comes one of the most fascinating calculations of the Revolution. After reaching Concord, British forces began returning to Boston. But by then, thousands of colonial militia members had gathered. The road back became a running battle. So, British forces, as we mentioned, it was 700, roughly 700. I'm not sure when they got to Concord or Lexington how many they lost, but let's, for the sake of argument, let's say 700 soldiers. Okay. The the Minutemen were in thousands, about 4,000. So now from 4,000, the ratio to 700, so roughly 5.7. If you recall, it was 9 British soldier for every 1 Minuteman. Minuteman. We examined earlier. Now it's every it's 6 Minutemen for every British soldier. So the calculation became a little different now. The numerical advantage had completely changed. At Lexington, the British held the advantage. On the road back to Boston, the colonies did. Okay. In section 7, how fast did revolutionary ideas spread? Perhaps the most important number is not population, not distance, not T, it is girth. Massachusetts showed other colonies that resistance was possible. News spread through riders, newspapers, letters, town meeting. What began as a local dispute became a continental movement. So, the simple civic math is one colony protesting, then 2, then 4, then 8, and so forth. So, you all the way through 13. This isn't exact history, but it illustrates a powerful idea. Revolutionary ideas can spread rapidly when people share them. Massachusetts became the spark that helped ignite 13 colonies. In section 8, let's look at the key political figures that actually were involved in this process. Throughout this episode, we have examined tea chest, miles, populations, and military ratios. But history is not made by numbers alone. Behind every calculation were people making decisions. Massachusetts produced some of the most important leaders of the American Revolution. Let's meet 4 of them. Okay? So Sam Adams. Okay? He was one of the most influential organizers of resistance to British policy. He helped build support for colonial rights through speeches, committees, meetings, and political actions. If the revolution had a chief organizer in Massachusetts, Samuel Adams would be near the top of the list. The civic math question: how many people can one person influence? Samuel Adams spent years turning frustration into organized action. Okay. The second person we are going to examine is John Adams. He was Samuel Adams' cousin. Unlike Samuel Adams, he was, that means John was actually a lawyer. He believed strongly in law, rights, and representation government. When Adams When independence was debated in Philadelphia, John Adams became one of the strongest advocates. So from Boston to Philadelphia, ideas traveled hundreds of miles. John Adams helped carry Massachusetts arguments to the Continental Congress. The third person we are going to examine is the Paul Revere. Okay. Paul Revere is remembered for his famous rights, but he was much more than a messenger. He was a skilled craftsman, businessman, and active member of revolutionary organizations. His ride helped spread critical information when speed mattered most. If information traveled faster, how much more prepared can people become? In April 1775, those hours made a difference. And the last person we are going to examine is going to be John Hancock. John Hancock was one of the wealthiest men in Massachusetts. He had a successful business and much to lose if the revolution failed. Yet he became one of its strongest supporters. Today, he is remembered for his large signature on the Declaration of Independence. A risk multiplied by principle equal action. John Hancock's signature symbolized a willingness to accept enormous personal risk for political principle. Sam Adams organized. John Adams argued. Paul Revere informed. John Hancock led. Each played a different role. None could have achieved independence alone, but together and with thousands of ordinary colonies, they helped create a movement that eventually became a nation. The story of Massachusetts is not simply the story of protest, tea, or battles. It is the story of people who calculated the risks, accepted the consequences, and changed history. And 250 years later, we are still living with the results of those decisions. If you like again this episode, please like, subscribe, and share it with one person. We'll see you next time.